The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. I want to get to our friend Will Reilly's latest book, but I do have to take judicial notice of the problems that Ibram Kendi, a.k.a. Henry Rogers, is having. Ibram Kendi is a cause celeb. He is the author of the How to Be an Anti-Racist Hustle, where he famously said that the cure for past discrimination is present discrimination. The cure for present discrimination, or the cure for past discrimination is present discrimination, and the cure for future discrimination is future discrimination. Basically, just discrimination all the time, and of course, it's based on identity. If you're a person of color, you're inherently oppressed by the honky.
And his real name is Henry?
Henry Rogers. Okay. So first, he posted on X an observation that runs afoul of his life's work, or at least his life's work for the past 5 years, where he was the cause celeb that I mentioned. He's getting all kinds of at least 5-figure, if not 6-figure honoraria to speak at colleges. He gets set up with this phony baloney think tank, sort of Biden quality phony baloney think tank up at Boston University, the Center to Study Anti-Racism or something to that effect. And then he posts on X that whites do not benefit from institutional racial privilege. In some cases, it's the opposite. And then, of course, people got wind of this and gave him holy hell. So he deleted it, but not fast enough. Then the New York Times published a piece cataloging how Kendi has failed to deliver on his promises, and quoting a number of colleagues and as well as a spokesman from Boston University that basically say he didn't do what he said he was going to do. Yeah. So, for example, Kendi's trouble. Where's this? Oh, I lost my place with this Boston U quote on Kendi's work. But anyway, as Mike Gonzalez writes over at Washington Examiner, Kendi symbolizes better than anyone the DEI, didn't earn it, regime that has implanted itself in institutions in all walks of life since the BLM riots of 2020. And now he is on the ropes, it would seem. Sort of wondering if that is an indication of more to come. Maybe somebody on the left, or maybe Robin DiAngelo will have an epiphany, or somebody on the left will get after her, the New York Times, and these other race hustlers. It's difficult to discern exactly if these are one-off events or if DEI is really on the wane, if the race hustle is really on the wane. Because certainly the left is not going to give it up without a fight. For more on all this, we're pleased to be joined by Will Reilly, Associate Professor of Poli-Sci at Kentucky State University. His new book is Lies My Liberal Teacher Told Me, Debunking the False Narratives Defining America's School Curricula. Will, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Always good to be back on.
So Ibram Kendi's plight, I know this is nothing new to you, his sort of phony baloney sinecure at Boston University, but that the left is taking notice and openly being critical of him, that is sort of new.
Yeah, I mean, I've sparred back and forth with Ibram Kendi for a couple of years on Twitter at an academic event. He's a nice guy in person, but I mean, I don't think he's necessarily the brightest bulb in the sconce. And I think Dr. Kendi was a guy who kind of got seized on during peak George Floyd. I mean, a moment of national hysteria, because he had a really simple idea about race, which I talk about in my upcoming book, Lies My Liberal Teacher Told You. But he had a very simple idea, which is essentially that any gap in, performance between two different groups is due to either genetic inferiority or it's due to racism. So if you don't want to be seen as an ugly, old-school, Archie Bunker type of racist, and a lot of people, I mean, I think all of us are, to some extent, from blue-collar backgrounds of Chicago, a lot of people really don't want that stereotypical label applied to them. If you want to dodge that, the only solution is to say that racism causes every difference, differences in test scoring, crime rate, so on down the line. And the response is, by the way, that that's simply not true. I mean, in one sentence, there are dozens of cultural, historical, regional, so on, gaps between groups. I mean, the modal average, white man is 58, black man is 27. But Kendi presented this really simple, really tempting kind of storyline, and America ate it up for a couple of years. He actually ran, I think it was just called the Center for Anti-Racism or Anti-Racist Research at Boston University, got something on the order of $40 million. It's all gone by this point. And I think that era is just sort of over. I mean, right now people are kind of looking at him, coming close to auditing him and asking, well, what happened? What happened to this money? What kind of research did you produce? And there doesn't seem to have been a whole lot done.
Wow.
So what does that mean? I mean, I meant, so he's a good example of being a bad example, but what do you think is going on with the racial grievance industry as we know it?
Well, I think that, in political science, one of the things we find is that social movements tend to move in cycles. I think the moment of peak racial grievance is over for some time, honestly. Following a bunch of things, following the death of George Floyd, following lockdown under COVID when people had a lot of time to kind of sit around staring at their navels thinking and so on down the line, a couple of other police conflict situations around that same time, Jacob Blake, America was really ready to obsessively feel guilt about race. And then, I mean, Americans are aggressive, fairly intelligent people. We started looking honestly at some of that stuff. And I mean, it turned out George Floyd very possibly overdosed on opiates. I mean, the other guy I mentioned, Jacob Blake, turned out to be a guilty rapist who returned to his victim's home and attacked an officer before he was shot. COVID-19, a deadly plague to be sure, but a lot of the things we were told even there about vaccines, about fatality rates were not real. And I think right now we're seeing sort of a backlash where people, including myself and including you guys, dug into the real data and found out, for example, what the hiring rate was for whites versus minorities during the past couple of years and so on, and said, well, okay, we're gonna really pull back from this. I think a business that I'm interested in right now that'll be, doing some work over the next couple of years will be almost anti-DEI consulting. How do we get this out of my mid-sized firm?
Yeah,
all
right.
the DEI, ESG, SEL, new HR. I mean, that's a money-making idea.
Wow. Now, do you talk about George Floyd and Jacob Blake in your book?
Not especially. Lies My Liberal Teacher Told Me is a book, and this comes out tomorrow, but it's a book that looks more broadly at sort of, there are really 2 points in the book. One is that for really about 70 years, this has been going on for a long time, kind of mainstream American education, American media, both of those lean about 93% to the left if you're talking higher education, has pitched the idea that Western culture is the worst culture in the world. We kept slaves, beat the natives, abused women, so on. And point two, that this is an original, edgy, novel idea. You're learning about feminism and communism. You're something different from your boring, stodgy parents. And I point out, one, there's actually some interesting discussion of morality and what it means, of whether it even exists in the book. But I point out, one, the things Western culture did that we consider to be bad today, if that's even a relevant idea, are the same things that all cultures did throughout history, whereas our glories are different. Abolitionism, the idea that people who are not themselves slaves oppose slavery, is a uniquely Western idea. But also, two, I wrote a piece bashing hippies, kind of just for fun, hippies and hipsters for the New York Post over the weekend. Mm-hmm. But the idea that this is novel and original, that you're learning about second wave feminism or about communism. It is actually not the case. This stuff is, by this point, fairly corny. These are the revolutionary movements of the 1960s that are just being repackaged in different forms and resold to different generations of would-be rebels. So all this stuff, I mean, the classic idea of Marxism to some extent, the mumbo-jumbo economic theory aside, is that all of society is a huge scam. Things that look facially neutral are in fact set up by the rich man to oppress everybody else. What you do with critical race theory is you just take the same model and you replace the rich man with the white man. Like all of society, standardized testing or whatever is set up to oppress blacks. Fourth wave feminism, you just replace the rich man with the man. You know, queer theory, you replace the rich man with the straight man, so on. So I talk about the idea, one, we're a pretty good place, and also, two, these same radical ideas are 100 years old now. We need to try something different, even if you want to authentically rebel.
Well, I mean, it's not exactly a recycling. I mean, I would argue it's not a recycling. I would argue that it's a continuum. And I mean, if you go back to the Frankfurt School and you travel the century forward to present, you're right. There are different iterations of sort of the same fundamental philosophy. But it's in advance of something. It's in advance of something that we saw Black Lives Matter proudly arguing for during its apex, which is the destruction of the nuclear family. What are the two bulwarks against state, family and church? And so there's been this march over the last century, and it takes different forms. But it's not. You know, I wouldn't really say it's sort of like a one step forward, one step or two steps back. It's been a pretty steady march forward towards the nihilistic society we're on the cusp of today, in my view.
No, I wouldn't disagree with that. I think that, I don't think we're disagreeing. I think that this philosophy has been remarkably successful, and that to some extent is one of the points in the book, that what's presented as edgy rebel philosophy today is actually the primary thing that's taught in the schools. So, I mean, I go through a bunch of different chapters here. So, chapter 1 is line number 1. Brutal, true slavery was virtually unique to America and the West. Line number 2. The Red Scare was just a moral panic that caught no commies. Line number 3. Native Americans were peaceful people who spent all day in dancing and making love. And it just goes on through the different chapters. Right. But those are things that are taught at the mainstream level in the American Academy. So I absolutely would agree that over time, what used to be sort of the radical fringe has become kind of the absolutely mainstream. Like, if I can read this for a second, there's actually a U.S. government curriculum called Native American Contributions. This is a passage from it. The natives had a love of every form of life. The Native Americans did not kill anything they could not use. They never killed an animal or a fish for the sport of it. Higher forms of ecology were apparently also practiced. Across all or almost all tribes, Native Americans lived in harmony with nature and did not abuse the natural world. Native Americans were ecologists long before the word was ever used. And just sort of on and on and on. Like the idea that societies before ours were kind of paradisical, and
and we ruined it. Yeah,
we ruined conquer paradise.
Yeah. No. But I mean, well, here's one too, and sort of more of the modern iteration of the movement Marxist. Russell Sage College is launching a 20-hour gender-affirming voice program in the spring of 25, which allows gender-diverse individuals to modify their voices and nonverbal behaviors like sneezing to align with their identities.
Oh my gosh!
So it's like we're gonna teach you're on this spectrum. You're non-binary. We're gonna teach you how to be, I don't know, more or less flamboyant or whatever it is. But I mean, talk about it's so authentic. It's so real. We have to teach you what it's like to be. We have to teach you how to behave so that you can identify with what you say you are.
I mean, that's Monty Python level.
It is Monty Python. It is. It's absolutely Monty. Yeah. I mean, it might as well be the Ministry of Silly Walks. But I mean, that's at Russell Sage College. It's not Harvard, but it wouldn't surprise me if this was at Harvard too.
One of the things that actually is, I mean, I don't describe myself as a male feminist because I'm not a creep, but there is a reality. Like, I grew up in a big city. I like women. The first and second waves of feminism, good for society mostly. So there is something almost offensive about a lot of this. Like, what gender is just codified sex stereotypes, right? So like when you're learning to be more gender appropriate, the assumption is that there's a certain way for men and women to be. So, like, girls are silly little creatures that kind of hee-hee when they sneeze, and so you're going to teach big dudes to do this because they're now women. It would be hilarious to be in this class. Like, as a guy who's been known to talk trash on the ball court or golf course, I mean, this would be funny.
I could be a coach, like, to teach them how to sneeze like, achoo, instead of achoo, you know?
That's actually finishing school for these guys here. But you know, the idea is beyond hilarious, but it becomes less funny when you realize that both of you guys do, under modern U.S. or EU law, I mean, if you declare your gender identity as female and you go through a couple of years of this kind of thing, you're then in the, women's locker room sneezing daintily.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So I mean, that's the punchline, competing for the NCAA women's national. So less amusing.
Will Reilly is associate professor poli-sci at Kentucky State University. The new book, Lies My Liberal Teacher Told Me, Debunking the False Narratives Defining America's School Curricula. Again, Lies My Liberal Teacher Told Me. It's available tomorrow. Pick it up. Will Reilly, thanks as always for joining us. Good luck with the book.
Thank you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy using the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Are you turning 65 and thinking about Medicare? Or are you over 65 and haven't enrolled yet because you still have coverage at work? Either way, Medicare done correctly will be the best health insurance you will ever have. Imagine having an annual deductible of only $240.